my pleasure to present our speaker today, who's Hubert Wagner, and will be telling us about Beyond the Shape of Data, detecting spatial interactions in high-dimensional data sets. And just before you start, we like to have like a conversation between the speaker and the audience. So if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, or write it directly in the chat, and we will be monitoring the chat. So Hubert, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Daniela, and also Henry for organizing and inviting me. Right, so I would like to talk about this work. So I mentioned a couple of things. I mentioned the shape of data. So hopefully it's obvious that I'm going to talk about things related to TDA. I will be interested in analyzing high-dimensional data, and I will try to convince you that detecting what I call spatial interactions is going to be relevant for some type of high-dimensional data. Maybe for context, this was done as part of this grant project, which was funded by Google, and the idea was to analyze neural networks, especially deep learning models using topological methods. So some years ago, in our work with Chao Chen and his group, we've had some success in analyzing certain aspects of neural networks, in particular, a certain type of attacks that people can perform on neural networks. So we managed to analyze it using topological methods. In a sense, what I'm going to talk about today is a continuation of this project. So I will be mentioning, in particular in the motivation, I'll be mentioning some things related to neural networks. If anything is unclear, I will essentially just show some pictures. But if anything is unclear, I'm happy to to have a conversation. Feel free to interrupt me also with other type of questions. And I should say it's the work with those people here from UF. So let me actually start from a motivation, and let me actually start from a graph, since the topic is networks. And so what I'm trying to show here is that it's meant to show the training progress of some machine learning model, and I'm showing the accuracy. So it's a classifier. I'm showing both training and test accuracy, and it looks like we're getting what we want. It takes quite a bit of time. It takes quite many epochs. So the model had to go through the entire training data set more than 300 times. But in the end, it really converged and got very close to 100% accuracy, both on the training and test data. So it looks like a perfect training. And it seems like the model really learned the task and understood the problem. So I will try to see, in this very simple case, I will try to see inside this model, and I cooked it up so that we can really look inside and visualize what it's doing in 3D. So what I'm showing here, this is the input data. And essentially the idea is that in the course of, while doing a processing inside those layers, the model should kind of disentangle those two pieces of data, the red and blue points. So far this is not happening. This is the stage at the very beginning of training. And then I will show you updates as the model is learning. So far it starts with this three-dimensional point cloud, and then it performs some computations, and this is one embedding it produces. Then it applies some more computations. This is another embedding. This is yet another one, and this is the final embedding. And as you can see, the data is not disentangled. It's just a big blob of red and blue points. But it has, it hasn't really started learning, so maybe this is expected. And as we proceed with the training, so now, the model has been updated and it's trying to do better. And as we train, the model starts doing something like this. And really, instead of trying to kind of really disentangle, really separate those two pieces of data, it actually noticed that if it kind of constricts the red ring around this point, it will not affect the accuracy too much, because in the end, there is just going to be, a very small number of points which it loops around. So all those points are going to be, all those blue points inside are going to end up being misclassified. But it doesn't really affect the accuracy all that much. And now it's really tuning the accuracy. It actually noticed that if it kind of rescales or stretches the data, then it can really loop around a very small number of points, and it achieves nearly perfect accuracy. So if you didn't know what's happening here, you would be very happy with this model and you may use it. And this is, admittedly a slightly artificial example. In reality, if we really had a three-dimensional data set, if we really wanted to just solve this task, those intermediate embeddings would be high-dimensional, and then this would not be a problem. So here I'm really forcing the model to work in 3 dimensions. But one would expect that it would be able to disentangle those two pieces of data, and sometimes with a slightly different random initialization, exactly the same model will actually succeed in doing this. So this is another training round for exactly the same architecture. So here it also achieves. So here it converges to perfect 100% accuracy, and actually achieves it on both the training and test data. And I think it's interesting to see how it does this. So initially, it's kind of similar. It's initially nothing interesting happens, and we also have one kind of colorful blob in the end. But as the model learns, it does kind of realize that it's a good idea to really disentangle those two pieces of data. And around here, what it does, it kind of, instead of constricting this red loop, it actually opens it up. And then this makes it easy to really separate those two pieces of data. In this case, by the time we're here, the situation is really easy. Those two subsets are already linearly separable. So at this point, the problem is really solved, and then it just tunes it slightly, and we're essentially done. And we did manage to completely disentangle those two subsets. So this is what we would expect, but as you have seen, it doesn't always happen. And I think there was a question.
There's a question. What is the kind of input-output data of this disentangled task?
So the input is exactly what's here, and the color corresponds to the correct label. So red could be 0, blue could be 1, and the task is classification. So also in the end, here what I'm showing here, you could think about those as soft predictions. So in the end, we want to embed the blue points close to this standard basis vector, and the red points close to this standard basis vector, or in other words, those are the one-hot encoded vectors corresponding to the correct labels.
Could I also ask a question?
Sure.
quickly. I just didn't understand what was the difference between the first group of plots and the second one, where the red circle was shrinking and here it's expanding. But what was the difference between the setups?
The setup is exactly the same. It only depends on the random initialization. So if you run it multiple times, you will sometimes get the first behavior and sometimes the second behavior.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
And it's just related to the fact that those networks are initialized randomly. Okay, so hopefully, I suppressed a lot of details here, but I hope, this picture is clear. And this was my motivation. This type of behavior was my motivation to think about geometric topological methods which could detect and quantify those type of situations when you have two or more subsets of data and they, let's say, interact in an interesting way. For me, this would be an interesting interaction. So the talk will be about developing geometric topological tools, which could, for example, tell me that there is this kind of non-trivial interaction, and also would allow me to track how those interactions change, for example, as I move from one layer of a model to another, and also as I'm progressing during the training as we did here. So also I'm interested in how those interactions evolve in time, in particular during training of a machine learning model. And I mean, with topological methods, in particular with topological data analysis, we have really great tools to study the shape of data. So if if we were interested in the shape of this data set, for example, then we could compute, the persistence diagram, and it would characterize this shape. In particular, we would learn that there is this kind of large void here. We would know, in particular, we would know how much we would have to enlarge those balls before it gets filled in. Similarly, here we would know that if we increase the radius of those balls a little, then we will have this loop here. And we could also consider another data set, like this one. We could perform the same analysis to this, but the tools we have really work on those subsets separately. And if I wanted to check how those two subsets interact, how they are related to one another, well, then maybe I could take their union and compute their persistence. But that's not ideal, and we would really like to have something which really captures those interactions. So in particular, the input should be those two data sets, and we should get a descriptor which tells me how they interact. And my point here is that with standard topological tools focus on a single data set. So we would really like to consider those as two different point clouds embedded in the same space, and get a descriptor which tells us how they interact. In particular, that this blue subset is inside the red void, and also that this kind of that there are those two loops which are kind of linked together to some extent. So we would like to have a descriptor which would tell us those things, and not just topological information about individual subsets. Maybe one thing I would add is that, of course, we can compute persistence diagrams or persistence barcodes for those two individual subsets, and of course there are tools for comparing those subsets through, for example, computing the bottleneck distance. But so in a sense, there is already a way of comparing information about two data sets, but one limitation there, which normally is actually an advantage, is that persistence barcodes are invariant under translations and rotations of the input in particular. So in a sense, they really forget about how those two pieces of data are arranged in space with respect to each other. So in a sense, in this case, one of the biggest advantages of those topological methods is actually a limitation, which would prevent us from really capturing those interactions. I mean, if we took those two data sets and moved them apart, the two individual diagrams would be exactly the same. So my point is that we really need new tools if we are really serious about analyzing this type of data. And one solution to this I'm proposing is what we called a mix-up barcode. And it is a topological descriptor which will encapsulate both the shape of a data set, but also spatial interactions with another data set. So I will try to explain how it works. So I would first offer some context, then I would give you very briefly mathematical setup for this, and essentially just show you some examples so that you see what it captures and what it doesn't. And looking at time, I don't think we'll have time to really talk about the algorithm for computing this, but maybe the important thing is that we understand how what this type of descriptor captures for in data. So first of all, this initial motivation that I presented with neural network training, this is actually directly motivated by this blog post from more than 10 years ago by Chris Olach. I became aware of this only around 2018 and started thinking about those problems. But one problem was that standard persistence is just not sufficient for doing those things. There has been some work applying standard persistence in very similar settings, but hopefully by now I've convinced you that ideally we would have another type of tool which actually captures those interactions as opposed to capturing geometry and topology of those individual data sets. And this idea of the mix-up barcode is actually is going to be defined through this framework of image kernel and co-kernel persistence, which actually goes back all the way to 2009. This was by David Konsteiner, Herbert Edelsbrunner, and Dmitry Morozov. And I think Dmitry in particular came up with a very elegant algorithm for computing those things, or actually different algorithms. And then one other breakthrough, which essentially enables us to do those things, was this work by Uli Bauer and I think his student, and it has to do with efficient computation of image persistence. So it really expressed those computations in terms of the Uli's Ripser framework, which allows for much faster computation in the context of high-dimensional data than you could just do with normal methods. So with this, there was hope to actually compute things related to image persistence and by extension, those mix-up barcodes I want to talk about. And one other important thing is this development of chromatic TDA, which recently came from Herbert's group. In particular, Ondra Draganov has been working a lot on this and has software in particular for computing image persistence for low-dimensional data. So there is this broader direction of chromatic TDA. The idea is very similar. You don't have just a single data set. You have a point cloud, and points may have different colors, and they should be treated differently. So you could say that the example I showed is an example of a chromatic point cloud, and you should rephrase what I said, that we need chromatic TDA and not just standard TDA to be able to solve those type of problems. So the basic idea is in terms of point clouds, but I will also mention how it extends to to graphs and networks in general. So in any case, giving 2 point clouds A and B, let's say in RD, we'll be interested in how the RIPS persistence of A is affected by the inclusion of points from B. So there will be examples in a moment. And in a sense, the algebraic definition is at the level of of simplicial filtrations. So at this level, we can say that we're actually studying the inclusion of the RIPS filtration of A into the RIPS filtration of the union of the points. So in overview, this is going to be the basis for this method, and I will focus on point cloud data, but I just want to mention that you can start directly from things like graph filtrations. So let's say this is a graph, and you can think about any filtration on it, and then you have a sub-filtration of this graph, and those would be your 2 data sets, and you want to check how including one into the union affects the persistence of the subset. And similarly, we can do the same at the level of simplicial filtrations. So I have a filtration and then a subfiltration. So this would be relevant in the context of higher order networks, and I know many people are interested in this here, and often compute persistent homology as a descriptor of such a network. So if you had 2 networks which happen to be nested, then those tools could also be applied. But going back to point clouds, we have A and B. We compute RIPS of A and RIPS of the union of A and B, and I call those filtrations and L and K at the level of simplicial complexes. I apply homology to this, so I get this type of commutative ladder, and then I will be interested in 2 types of persistence information. I'll be interested in just standard persistent homology of L, or rather this persistence module induced by L, and also I will be interested in what's known as image persistent homology, which is just persistent homology of the image of this vertical inclusion here. And again, this goes back to this theory of image and kernel persistent homology from 15 years back, and somehow it hasn't gotten too much traction, and I think most people haven't really looked into this. So perhaps it's a bit mysterious what this does. But I will try to explain it on examples, and it will be a crucial kind of feature of crucial element of this of the descriptor I'm proposing. And I should stress that we will be combining those 2 pieces of information in some way, as opposed to just looking at them separately. We could have computed image persistence and standard persistence already 15 years ago. The key idea here is to combine the 2 pieces of information. So let's say this is our example. So those are, for me, those are 2 point clouds. I'm showing them, at some thickening radius, but you should really think about those as 2 point clouds, A and B. And the first thing we could compute is, let's say, this Mixup barcode. When I consider the red points and include them into the union of red and blue points. So in other words, I take red and include into all the points. And the first thing I could compute is just, the regular persistence diagram of R, of the red points. And in degree 2, we would get something like this. There would be this long bar. Again, this long bar here is just meant to show the persistence of the red points. And here it corresponds to this big void, which is born around this radius and only dies after a significant thickening. So, there is a big red void, and this information is only about the red points. But then we actually, in this construction, we actually split each bar into this, what we call image part and mix-up part. So we have those 2 sub-bars, and, the black sub-bar actually tells us how much sooner this topological feature dies when we add the blue points. So in other words, since we have blue points inside this void, we actually only have to thicken the red points much less before it gets filled up and the void disappears. So here, this really shows that what we're showing here really combines the information about the persistence, which is the long bar, and then it's split into those 2 pieces of information. And in particular, this light blue part tells us how long a given feature survives when we add those new points, namely the blue points. There are some other very small interactions, but here the main interaction we're detecting is essentially that the blue points are inside this red void. Another thing we can compute is the same thing in degree 1, so it will have something to do with things looping around each other. So again, we look at standard persistence of the red points, and here there is this prominent loop which corresponds to this handle here. We have this kind of sample of a solid torus here. So this is what's detected by this long bar, but then this long black subbar tells us that it's going to die much sooner when we introduce the blue points, simply because we're quite literally filling up this hole inside. So again, this is information about the persistent homology of the red points, and we split it to show the information about the interaction of the red points with the blue points. Again, in this case, this hole here only survives until this point, and then from this moment on, it becomes trivial. We could also do this in degree 0, so it would have something to do with how connected components merge, but nothing really interesting is happening in this case. But if we look from the other perspective, if we include the blue points into the union of red and blue, we do have interesting information about H0. So something is changing in terms of how the blue connected components merge, And this makes sense because here we have those two prominent separate connected components. And when we include the red points this time, then they will connect much sooner. So this long bar here detects this. And in general, the longer the black part of those barcodes, the more interaction there is. And the stronger the interaction and the more red bars we have, the more frequently we have some kind of interaction. Another interesting case is in H1 when we include blue into the union. And here the persistence, if we look at this prominent persistence, maybe not so prominent, but if we look at this bar, you will see that it actually starts quite late. And it clearly corresponds to this kind of half open loop. And so we need to thicken those points quite a lot before this loop closes. So that's why it starts late here. But then when we include the red points, then the loop is already trivial practically right away. And nothing interesting is really happening in terms of H2. So there was no really non-trivial blue void. So there was really nothing to interact with. So nothing really changes here. And when you get used to thinking about this, if I would show you just, in particular, if I would just show you those mix-up barcodes, you should be able to go back and imagine what's happening in the data, at least, unless nothing totally crazy is happening. So, I think this carries quite a lot of information, which is, once you get used to this, I think it's quite intuitive what's being captured there.
So I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just, before you showed this, thinking whether this is symmetric in terms of which point cloud you include in unions, and this shows that this is not symmetric. So there's sort of choice involved, or is it that you usually always study the both inclusions to get the full picture?
I think it will depend on the problem. You can always study both. I would imagine that in some cases you want to capture, presumably those two pieces of data could come from very different things. I'm focused on high-dimensional data here. This was the motivation I gave, but another very natural motivation is in the context of cancer immunology, and this is also what the people I mentioned from Herbert's group. This was also their motivation, their original motivation for this chromatic TDA in low dimensions. And there, you may be interested in how the immune cells surround cancer cells. So you have a natural choice for this inclusion. If we presume you're not interested in the opposite situation, namely cancer cells surrounding immune cells, maybe this is less relevant. And I think in practice it actually is less relevant. So depending on the data, depending on the problem, you may be more interested in one of those two inclusions, but you can always compute both, and get and often you will get complementary information. But yes, but I should stress what you said, that it's non-symmetric.
Yeah, but that was a good example. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Can I have a very quick follow-up to this? One way how we look at inclusions is also the disjoint union of red and blue, which I think you could also do. If you look at the Rips complexes, you could take only those simplices that are fully blue or fully red, and that would be your subcomplex. And then you get kind of the union of the diagrams for red and blue, but then you capture both interactions at the same time. And if I understand correctly, I think the Uli's algorithms are pretty general, so they should be able to deal with this also easily, right? So maybe one thing to try, which is a symmetric version.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's another option. Yeah, thanks. So I mean, this was, by the way, Ondra, who I mentioned, many times, and he's actually here, so that's good. So yeah, so this would be another option, and then maybe I should say, this is just one thing you can do. This is the first thing I kind of bumped into, and I think it's one way of combining different pieces of information. In this case, about standard persistence and what people call image persistence. In Ondra's work, they look at more of those barcodes, and also they have non-trivial relationships between them. So I think I think all of this is kind of just starting, and I'm sure there will be new ways of capturing this type of interactions, and in general treating data sets which are not just a single point cloud, but but your data is different subset of a point cloud, or in other language, you have a colorful chromatic point cloud. So looking at those examples, it's kind of clear that at least for in many cases they will capture some kind of spatial information. More technically, they capture how much sooner topological features arising from A die when they're kind of polluted by B, and the persistence, the lifetime will always decrease in such a case. And as we've seen, maybe the clearest example was in codimension 1. So this was H2 in R3. So we have seen that in this case, those mix-up barcodes capture surrounding. So red points were surrounding the blue points. In degree 1, there was this kind of looping. Actually, in this case, the two subsets were kind of linked together, so they were kind of looping around each other. In degree 0, to some extent, they capture some kind of contact or separation between those two pieces of data. And for me, the interesting case is actually for high-dimensional data and those intermediate homological degrees. And it's kind of hard to imagine what's happening there. And we kind of have words, we have intuitions about those different relationships, those different interactions in 3D. If we wanted to imagine what's happening in what degree 5 means in 16-dimensional embedding space, it's not so easy anymore. But we mathematically we can, at least technically we can do this, and I would be interested in in capturing those type of information, in particular from neural networks motivated by this initial example. So we're pretty much out of time, but that's actually good timing. So to summarize, what I try to convince you is that this idea of a mix-up barcode is gives you a descriptor which encapsulates the shape, not only the shape of data, but also, let's say, spatial interactions between two different data sets embedded in the same space. What I didn't really explain is that the computations are pretty much as efficient as with standard persistence, or as inefficient if you want. This requires some extra work, but this seems to be the case. So this is in contrast with, for example, techniques like multi-parameter persistence, where the algorithms get really complicated. So I think Peter had a good observation that, in a sense, this is somewhere in between standard persistence and multi-parameter persistence. We still get to just use the all the tricks, all the efficient computations, but we get a little bit more than with standard persistence. So hopefully we'll have for higher dimension data, hopefully we'll have an efficient public implementation soon. Ondra already have a really nice Python package for chromatic TDA in low dimensions. So if you're curious about this, or you really care about low dimension applications, I would really recommend this. You can also, with just a little bit of effort, you can actually compute Mixup barcodes based on his implementation. So that's really nice in low dimensions. And if you're interested in more details, which most of which I suppressed, we have a draft on archive. So I would encourage you to read. And although I should say I will be updating it. For example, the motivation is actually much less interesting and much less clear, I would say, than what I presented today. And I think that's it.
So before anything, let's all unmute ourselves and thank Hubert, or do it digitally. So thanks, that was super interesting. I actually have some questions myself, but I wonder first if people in the audience have questions. If you do, either write them in the chat or better just unmute yourself and ask them, please.
I had two questions. So first of all, you said that this mix-up barcode, it captures the shape of a data set, well, one of the two, and the spatial interaction with another data set. But then I'm curious if you would go back to your original motivation that you started with, where you want to basically assess this entanglement with neural networks. You actually only care about the spatial interaction. You don't care about the shape of any of the data sets, right?
That's a good question. So also for this case, we actually ran some experiments on actual high dimensional networks, and one thing we found is that actually having those two pieces of information together is crucial, because if you only focus on the interaction part, so if you only focus on the for example, if you only focus on the image persistence part, you kind of it's hard to tell how much really changed. So what we really want to see, maybe let me use one of those examples. What we really want to see is how much of the persistence, how much the persistence was affected by including the other data set. And I don't think I can explain it fully here, but in the end, what you want to look at is really the ratio of the two. So in the end, the actual descriptor, the actual data you use, for example, this is what we did in our statistical analysis, was that you want to really look at the ratio. So you want to know like what percentage of persistence is taken away by introducing the other data set. If you don't do this, then in particular, you kind of lose. So maybe I should say that if you do this, the method becomes pretty much scale invariant, which is something you do want. So I can't really explain it fully, but in short, it's actually very useful to have those two pieces of information together, because then you can generate more detailed information based on that.
Yeah, I really appreciated this example that you gave from the application of, I think, Adelsbrunner that you mentioned, this example from biology. So how the cancer cells are surrounding the immune cells or the other way around. There I understand that's important, and I understand that's additional information. But I'm just thinking if I'm missing something, with the neural networks example, I mean, whether I have red and blue point clouds extremely complicated, but they are still possible to be separated, for example, with a hyperplane, or whether these red and blue are very simple. I mean, ultimately, what I care about is how easily separable they are. Or basically, maybe the question is, what were you actually predicting or assessing in that first paper that you mentioned? Maybe that's a more precise question.
Right. So I mean, so what we were in experiments, what we were doing, we were trying to quantify essentially how much. So we in the end we had a simple kind of statistic derived from those Mixup barcodes, and they essentially capture how much. In short, they capture how much and how strong those interactions were, and then we were able to correlate this information with how well the model ends up training, and in particular, how in particular how if it overfits or not.
Okay, cool. Could you send a link to that paper or the title of that paper in the chat, maybe, or just say it, whatever is easier.
Yeah, let me show it. So if you look for this, you should be able to find it. It's on arXiv. If you look up Mixup barcodes, I think this is the only paper mentioning it.
Okay. Yes, found it. Great. Maybe I give the floor to other people, and if there's time, I go for my second question. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have another question for Hubert? Andrea, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much for the interesting talk. So the first question was more, say, topological, and yeah, I have in a way two ideas that you conveyed about how the spatial interaction works, and yeah, so the first one I was asking, like, is those black bar just like the kernel of the persistent homology, or better, the persistent homology kernel?
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. I totally agree that it seems like it should be the kernel, because the first part is the image, and then we want to capture the thing which disappears or is mapped to zero, so it looks like the kernel. In the end, for reasons which are quite subtle, it's not the kernel.
Okay.
And it has to do with the fact that, I mean, a very short answer is that if you consider the definition of the kernel persistence module, you compute it. In a sense, you forget the information about persistence, and then, in a sense, this decomposition you get, in a sense, is incompatible with what you get from standard persistence. And this does not happen for standard persistence and image persistence. So those two play together nicely. And in the end, what we get here, it looks like a kernel, but it's generally not technically the kernel. And I think I have a brief example showing this. So if you consider this example, you will see that those mix-up bars, so the black bars, are actually different than if you compute the kernel persistence kind of by definition. If you were to just decompose this kernel persistence module, you will get something slightly different. And in this case, since we kind of look at this from the perspective of the standard persistence bars, those mix-up subbars, are kind of more intuitive.
Okay. Yeah, and so is it maybe related more to, like, it seems like a Alexander duality thing, in which like the thing filling a cell, we are kind of intersecting with the other cell, like we have two loops. This is standard. For example, in knot theory, you take like a filling the first cycle, and you are in a way, this spatial interaction seems the fact that those two intersect a phase and the other loop. So yeah, I was wondering if that's like a perspective that you're using, like through persistent cohomology, or not.
And no, it's not a perspective I'm using.
Okay. Yeah.
But if you,
Maybe.
like I'm definitely interested to hear, what would be other people's perspectives on this. I think we just need more people, looking at this general idea of, chromatic data. So I think we do need new perspectives.
Yeah. Again, I will leave the floor to others and maybe ask another question later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe just to complete this, what's image kernel and mix-up? The blue parts are the image persistence, and the black parts, if you only take the sets of births and sets of deaths, that would be the same as in the kernel, but the matching is generally different in between the kernel persistence and the mix-up bars. So they are closely related, but not the same thing in general.
Yeah, thanks. This is a great point. And also, if you just wanted to compute, like, let's say, total kernel persistence or total mix-up, because of Ondraset, they would also coincide. So the difference is really in how those two pieces of information are matched together, and here we kind of match them, through this image persistence.
May I ask my question? Thank you. Could you please estimate computational complexity of the mix-up subbars for depending on dimensionality of space and the number of points in this space?
Yeah, that's a hard question. So I suppress some details about how it's really computed. I don't really want to go into this, but maybe someone wants to read it. So I should say, in the end, the complexity is, at least morally, it's the same as for computing standard persistence for high-dimensional data. And I don't think, the issue with those type of computations is that there is a horrible worst-case complexity, and then tend to work much better in practice. So I don't think, talking about the worst-case complexity is so relevant in practice. In practice, the computations tend to scale exponentially in dimensions. And I mean, exponentially in particular, exponentially in the degree you care about. So because of this, we're typically, for high dimensional data, we're typically limited to low degrees, like 0, 1, 2, maybe sometimes 3 for smaller data. And so in practice, the efficiency to some extent is a limitation. So I don't think it's going to be possible to compute those things for, like, definitely not for things like billions of high-dimensional points. But I guess the current limit for an implementation like RIPSER would be I don't know, in tens of thousands, in low enough, if you're interested in low enough degree, and then in very low degrees like 0, you could actually handle very large data sets because this is a much easier computation. So sorry for not really answering the question about the complexity. In short, it's essentially the same as for standard computations, in particular using something like RIPSR, which tends to be much more efficient in practice than the theoretical worst case behavior of those algorithms would dictate. Does it help, or did I completely completely misanswer the question?
I don't remember who asked the question. Maybe you can unmute yourself. Otherwise, we will have to assume that it does help. I guess it helped for most of us. Yeah, does anybody else has a question? Perhaps we have time for one more. Yeah, there's one in the chat. Thank you for the great talk. I wonder how this compares to the arch cross barcode of Bubenik et al.
Oh, right. I remember bumping into this. I don't have a good answer, but it's I did see this recently, and I definitely want to look more into what exactly they did. It seemed related, but I don't have anything interesting to say how exactly it compares.
Okay, they say thank you, and the person who couldn't reply before said that they're okay, they just couldn't connect. There was a lag in the connection about the computational complexity. We have 1 minute left. I wonder if there's one short. Go ahead, Andrea. No, there's one more, just sorry, Deb, just to give a different person a chance. So how to apply this on 3D points with different attributes and orientation. But I'm not exactly sure what they mean.
Yeah, I'm also not clear. I mean, so if attributes are kind of binary, like 0 and 1, then you have two subsets. So this is directly you could use directly what we did. As for orientation, I don't know what that means.
Do you want to unmute yourself and ask what you mean exactly by orientation? Because I'm actually not sure what you mean either.
In the meanwhile, I would just comment that it's important that the setup is for let's say 2 data sets which are embedded in the same, let's say, metric space. So if, for example, if you're interested in orientation in a sense that maybe one of those guys can move freely, so if you want to compare things which can move freely, for example, have different orientations, then this is not really the right setup because it will, the barcodes you get will be invariant in particular under orientation changes and other rigid motions, but only if you move them together. If they are meant to, if you want to kind of quotient by those guys moving separately or rotating separately, then maybe standard persistence is actually the way to go, because then you can compute the persistence diagrams individually. And when you compute something like the bottleneck or Wasserstein distance between them, you will be invariant. This comparison will be invariant under orientation changes.